Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Survivor Space and today's Survivor Circle session. My name is Becky Perkins. I'm the Survivor Support Specialist at Zero Abuse Project, and I'm very pleased to welcome you here today. Thank you for joining us. Just a couple of notes about how to participate today before we get started. If you've not joined us before, hopefully if you're watching the live stream, you know that it's available on the Survivor Circle page in the blue box under the label live stream. If you want to make your screen larger, you should be able to click on a small square icon in the bottom right corner of your screen, and that will make it larger. If you would like to submit a question or a comment at any time during the presentation, please type into the chat box on the Survivor Circle screen where it says enter your message here. I will be monitoring the chat throughout the presentation, and we'll get to your questions and comments time permitting. The session will also be recorded today. So if you need to leave today for any reason, if it's your schedule or if you need to step away to take care of yourself, please do that. The recording will always be available on the Survivor Circle page. So without further ado, I am so pleased to welcome back Kaisa Kay, our wonderful presenter today, who's going to continue her series of sessions on transforming trauma. And today we're talking about beginning your memoir. Welcome, Kaisa.
Thank you. Thank you, Becky. I am so glad to be here with you. And some of you saw the last one, The Healing Art of Writing. This one is strictly about memoir writing. It's strictly about telling your own story. And I call it baby steps. And the reason I'm calling it Transforming Trauma, Baby Steps, Beginning Your Memoir is because you don't have to take a giant step. Do you remember that game in childhood where there'd be somebody up here and then everybody else is back here, and you take a giant step or you take a baby step and you'd get up to them? Well, whether you're taking a giant step or a baby step, you're still going to get there. You're still going to get this done. And it's not necessary to do it all at once. Huge, big project. When I started Tornado Alley, which is my special book, um, well, I called it my monster. And my friend Robin said, "You're going to have to stop calling it the monster if you're going to actually embrace it and do this work." But I was thinking of it as this huge, enormous project that could eat my life. You know, that's not what happens. I'm very, very, very proud of you for being here. It takes courage. I was bicycling up a very steep hill in France once, and a woman I never saw again leaned out into the street and hollered, "Courage, courage." And so that's what I holler to you. Take courage. You can do this. You can definitely do this. So I want us to start together. I want us to kind of get in the same heart space. So let's put our feet on the floor, hands on our knees. Let's take a couple of deep breaths together, okay? And that'll help me get grounded, and it might help you too. Breathe in. Hold it for just a few counts. Breathe out. And wait before you breathe in again. Breathe in. Hold it. Breathe out. Wait. Last one. Breathe in. Breathe out. Now, I went a little fast for some of you, I know, but every time you take a really deep breath, you massage your heart. And you're going to need to massage your heart to do this work. You're going to need to love on yourself. This is really important to me. A memoir is very different from a biography or an autobiography. Those books tell you the whole story and lots of dates and time. This is different. This is a collection of memories. This is a collection of your memories. And you don't start with your whole life and everything you want to tell. You start with a single important incident. How do you begin? You think of one incident. Maybe it's that thing that you are afraid to tell. Maybe it's that thing you thought you would never tell. Maybe there are so many things you thought you would never tell that the idea of trying to pick just one incident is absolutely overwhelming. Yeah. Start with one thing, one time, one moment in time. Let me give you a couple of examples. This is from When Katie Wakes by Connie Mae Fowler. This is how she started. This man I share a life with, the one who beat me last night, the one who's 30 years my senior and unemployed, has pocketed the spare change off the dresser and pilfered a 20 out of my wallet and headed over to Salina's, a bar down the street, to get tanked up. That's her first sentence. Let's take another example. And you'll know this one. What you looking at me for? I didn't come to stay. I hadn't so much forgot as I couldn't bring myself to remember. I know why the caged bird sings, Maya Angelou. And now, one of my favorite people is Terry Ray in Boulder. The sidewalk in Houston, Texas was already hot that morning. It was Saturday, and I was headed to the yoga school for my weekly class. Each one of them is completely different. And yet each one begins something, begins a story. And that's all you have to do. Just begin. So you start with an incident and you explode the moment. You tell as many things about it as you possibly can. Now you're going to need, when you go into this work, to take extra care with yourself. Are you ready? This is important. You're going to need to have a designated place for your keys, your wallet, your phone. Maybe you have a bowl. Maybe it's a bowl in the middle of a table. Maybe it's a chair that has a bowl. You need a place for these things. And here's the reason why. When you start working on your memoir, when you start going into these incidents and exploding the moment, you really are transcending time. You're taking your heart and your soul and your spirit and yourself and your imagination back to a time that's beyond anything you're experiencing in the linear moment. And when you do that, sometimes it makes you a little spacey. When it's time to stop writing and go to the grocery store, go get the kids, whatever, when it's time to stop, there'll be this little shift. It's almost like a shift in consciousness. And you'll do it intentionally when you sit down to write. Or if you're like Ernest Hemingway, when you stand to write. He stood, wrote at a writing desk. Whatever you do, you have to prepare in advance, if you possibly can, for the fact that this is going to be a transformative experience. And it's going to be transformative not only during the process of writing, but before and afterwards. That's why some of us avoid it so much. You know, it's so easy to find something else to do. Have you been the one who goes and washes the dishes and makes sure all the laundry's done and everything's coordinated before you can sit down to write? That's a kind of avoidance that's very normal because you're going into a place that can be difficult. It can be really hard. For me, it gets so bad that I have to double check the burners before I leave the house. I have to make sure I've turned the faucets off if I've turned them on. When I'm really in flow, I'm so much in that other world, in that other part of my being, that it's difficult for me to do some of the very basic things that most people think are obvious, right? You might find that that happens for you because you are entering a time and a space that has its own intentions, and your intentions will change accordingly. Avoid email, avoid social media, avoid the news. There's a period of time when you're going to be doing this deep work, and you don't want to be thrown out of it by somebody else's problem that means absolutely nothing to your immediate moment. That doesn't mean it doesn't mean anything to you deeply. It doesn't mean that it's not important. It means that in order to do this work, you're going to have to focus. And you're going to have to focus your attention very, very, very intentionally on your heart, on your soul, on who you are as a human being. You are doing deep healing work. Okay? So let's think about that. Say you're like, okay, I'm sitting underright, la la la, nothing's happening, nothing's happening. I don't know if that's ever happened to you, but it's happened to me. So you need some things that'll sparkle your attention, right? That'll help you focus your attention. And we talked last time about cinnamon, good things, things that smell good. Well, now we're going into the darker places. And there's some scents that will help you get into the places you need to go to do your writing. Sometimes, for me, the scent of wintergreen always reminds me of my father. The scent of taboo perfume always reminds me of my great grandmother, Jean. So get some things that are helpful to you. And do you know what's most helpful to so many people? Music. The music that makes the difference to you. Find music from the time of the incident that you want to explore and play that music before you sit down to write. And it will help you get into the headspace that you need in order to really do, quite frankly, your best work. Because this is so important. This is so important. What you have to say cannot be said by anyone else. What you have to share cannot be shared by anyone else. You are literally the only person who can tell your story in your way. And we need you. There's a study I learned about this past weekend that showed that children had more compassion and empathy when they were good readers. That somehow reading and being able to walk in another person's shoes, understand the inner workings of another person's heart, somehow that helped increase empathy and compassion. So when you're able to tell your story, when you're able to speak to your truth, you'll be helping yourself. Oh, sure, you'll be helping yourself heal. There's no question it's going to change your life. But here's some even more important thing, in my humble opinion. Not that there's anything more important than your healing, maybe more universal. Everyone who picks up your story and reads it will have an increase in compassion and understanding for you, and therefore for anyone in their lives who's experiencing something like what you've known. And other people who maybe feel like they're all alone and there's nobody else who will ever get it, like me when I was a little girl climbing up into that mulberry tree with a book. Those people will find you and they'll know somebody else has lived through horrible things. And if they can live through these things, I can do it too. I can do it too. You're strengthening yourself. You're strengthening your readers. You're strengthening. Well, Elie Wiesel put it really beautifully. He said, we're mending the hole in the soul of the world. We're mending the hole in the soul of the world. So if you're thinking, hey, I'm going to go mend the soul hole over there, you're not going to be able to write a darn thing because that is way too much responsibility, right? That's the big picture. That's the big philosophical picture. So it's up to you as a writer to be able to focus in and break it down to that first incident, to that first moment. We all have troubles. We all have traumas. But if you're here listening to me today, you have a story that absolutely needs to be told. Absolutely needs to be told. So how do you do it? Okay. You're sitting there with the blank page, or you're sitting there with the computer on if you're a computer person. Make sure if that computer's on that you are not linking up to the internet. Don't let it bing. Don't let it ring. No. What are those things called? Facebooks or any of that social media stuff. None of it. Focus in. And then let yourself feel enough to know which incident you want to choose for this moment in time. Which incident do you want to choose to share for this moment in time? Maybe you've primed the pump a little by having your music. Maybe you have the sense over here and you're still not sure where to go. So how do you do it? Speak to yourself as if the you of now is reaching out in time to the you of then. Bring all the strengths and supports and knowledge that you've gained, all the spiritual values that you've gained over time, back to bear on this situation. Imagine yourself in the time and say, tell me all about it. Beginning, middle, and end. Don't leave anything out. Tell me all about it. I might say this several times because I believe it so much. Sometimes you're the only person you can trust with your truth. Sometimes there isn't anybody else. Sometimes you'll be the first person you can trust to tell your story to. And you're going back in time to the person who was hurt. And you're no longer living in that place of pain and suffering. You're no longer in that place. So you can stretch back and lift yourself up and love on yourself. It's almost like a way of listening. Now you're using all the five senses and you're telling the incident with all the five senses. And you write as much of it as you possibly can. You write as well, as fast, as much. And when you get stuck, take a deep breath. It's all right. And you can say, where were your hands? Where were your feet? Where was your face? And remember the pieces of it if it's not coming to you. Now, there are times where you're not going to need any of this. You grab that piece of paper and you are rolling, and it's done, and you're still writing and you don't want to stop. And then you have to go back and edit the whole thing. So there's that too. There are going to be those times, but there are going to be the stuck times. And you can say, after you've written your incident, which is just one incident, one moment in time, then you go back and think, what happened right before that? What happened right after that? How did this change my life? How did this change how I think about things? How did it change me into the person I am today? What you're doing is you're looking at the incident. You're writing the incident. You're sharing it. You're show don't tell, showing as much of it as you can. And then thinking, how was things before? How were things after? And you're giving it meaning. Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning said, "He who has a why to live can put up with almost any how." And it's that search for meaning that helps us keep going. And when you look back and tell what happened to you, it'll help you in your heart to find meaning in why and how to go forward. You can, if you want to, you can get some photos from that time. Sometimes that helps, sometimes it doesn't. What can happen is if you get a photo from that time is you'll get so emotional about the photo that you won't be able to write a word. Now that's me. That might not be you. But sometimes it does happen. So remind yourself over and over and over again, you right now, adult you are in control of this narrative, and you are sharing with as much honesty and candor and authenticity as you can possibly bring to bear on it. You're in control. You're in charge. You're choosing your time. You're choosing the now moment. And you're choosing which incident of all the incidents in your life, which one you want to explore and explode and expand in this moment. So go deep. Go deep. Sometimes I can't go deep. I'll think there's something I want to say, but I can't quite. It's like, all right, let's just be real. It hurts too much. And in those times, take a piece of paper and I'll jot a few words on it. Just a few words. Maybe, in my case, basement. Maybe, in my case, the smell of Clorox. Maybe, in my case, ouch. That's all I can do. I'm putting that right over here. And then I'm going to write a happy story about how wonderful it was to go swimming. How wonderful it was to be on that lake. Yeah. And then when I'm feeling a little bolder, I'll pick up that. Usually it's a little card, piece of paper. And I'll say, okay, I'm ready. I got you. Let's tell it. Let's do this. And you're making it real for the reader. And to intensify the meaning, here's the thing. That difficult incident that you're exploring, in order to be really meaningful to the reader in a deep way, in order to be something they want to read on from, there has to be some kind of contrast. So the times that you just can't do it and you need to write about the happy part, that's fine. You need that contrast, you need that balance, you need that reality. And tell yourself, good work. Good work. A friend wrote to me a little note, very little note on a Facebook message this past month. And it said, "That's my gal." She wrote, "That's my gal." And I sat next to the computer and I just about burst into tears because that phrase, "that's my gal," meant to me, you're mine. I love you. You did a good job. You matter to me. There's probably a phrase like that that you can use as a reward for yourself because this is important. Your truth needs voice. Your truth deserves voice, and I need your story. I need it. You might consider a support group. You might consider a writing coach. You might consider a therapist. There are going to be other supports. I give thanks for 24-hour crisis lines. What matters is not how much you do in a writing session. You're sharing how you feel, how you perceive, and how you survive. And in the writing, you want to show some relief for the reader. You want to show some likability. It helps a lot if you show yourself doing something funny, or if there's an act of kindness in your life in any direction. And that'll help. That'll help you write your work. It'll give you a little breather from some of the intensity of the hard stuff. And you're going to have to make a lot of decisions in this work. As you move forward, there's some obstacles. Some of you have already met these obstacles. And we meet them inside our hearts before we meet them in our lives. You'll have to make the decision, for example, of what name to use. My Tornado Alley book was first published. I'll show you. Hold on just a minute. Let me go show you. Here's the first version of Tornado Alley. Notice the name. I think it looks backwards there, but it's Mimosa May. That's not my name. And the painting was done for me by a woman named Carol who lived in Black Mountain. I didn't want to use my real name. Mimosa May. My daughter picked it out. She made it up. God bless her. Mimosa May. But you know what? I couldn't put that work out there as Kaisa K. What would happen? My family, they would hate me. It took me a decade almost. Exactly the same book. Kaisa K. That's my book. That's my name. I wrote it. I want to own my life. I want to own all of my life. And now, exactly the same book, Tornado Alley. That's me as a little girl. It took me all this time to decide that I could, with courage, acknowledge this is my book. This is my life. Anybody who meets me can know who I am, and there's no shame in that. There's no shame in being who you are, in your history, in your past, in what you've accomplished, in what you've survived or overcome. Have courage. Have courage. That being said, how can I say it? Do not expect family support. Do not expect sunshine. You see, you're at this point in your healing, and this is the way you perceive, and this is the way you need to share and experience. The other people in your family, they had their own experiences. They had their own lives, and they didn't necessarily see or experience the same things you did, even if they lived in the same household. So you'll meet times when it will break your heart in some situations. Of course, I'm not saying this is a definite. I'm sharing my story with you. But you will have spent time writing the work of your heart. You'll bravely and courageously share it with someone you deeply love. And they'll say, "Why did you write that down? It's horrifying. Oh my gosh, just forget about it. I don't want to have anything to do with that." Yeah, it happens. So if you're writing your memoir so that you'll get support from your family and friends, rethink why you're writing it. They might not be able to handle your truth. They might not want to hear your truth. Then again, there's that opposite reaction. There will be people who will find it and say, thank you. Thank you. And I'm one of those people. Thank you. I had a friend show up on my doorstep with a copy of my book going, I didn't know. I would have changed things. I would have done something for you. No, you didn't know. You know now, whatever. When I first published that book, I wanted complete control over it, still do. And I was very strict about who could have a copy. It only was written so that I could, at that point in time, so that I could do my own healing and so that I could hand it to someone whom I trusted and loved. And that would let them know when I wanted someone to know my story, but I couldn't bear to speak it again. I just couldn't, or didn't want to, I could hand them my book, and then they would know. And then they would be able to talk about it with me or not as they preferred, and they could process it in their own way. That was my initial intention. And I'm asked all the time, well, did this happen to your other family members, to your cousins, Listen, that's not my story. I refuse to share about any other person's experience. I'm telling my story about my life, my way. Sometimes you may have to go through your book multiple times to get someone out of it who doesn't want to be in it. Sometimes you may need to change names to protect somebody, omit a person entirely, or even in the case of a couple of people I know, they've chosen to write their books as fiction. They're using pieces of their stories, but they're not really telling their own stories. And they're using it as something else. For me, it was really important to be that first person telling the story of my own life. And you can do it as a series of letters, a series of essays. I did mine as a series of stories and essays and letters and all this mishmash of stuff. So I'd write a little bit here, incident, write a little bit here, incident. I had different notebooks all over the house. And then I decided, okay, let's type this up. Then I decided, okay, let's put it together as some kind of book thing, right? That's when it became the monster. I found a woman named Laura Goodman who read it for me. And then I had a friend named Daryl Preston who he actually read it 10 times. At one point he said, don't do another rewrite. I can't stand it. It hurts. Stop. Yeah, so be gentle with your friends. And I did something very unusual in my own book. Well, not that unusual, but a little bit. And that is that I went from a painful experience to the current time. I went to France and stayed in Oleander Cottage. And I wrote the French parts as they happened. And it gave light and spirit and sunflowers in a different way to the book. So it was really important to me because I wanted to continually remind myself of the now moment. I couldn't just look back and look at the horrors and feel the horrors and experience and not remind myself and remind the reader, hey, I lived through it. That's not happening now. I didn't anticipate how much I'd have to deal with naysayers. I actually had the idea in my mind that if I wrote this book, everyone who had known me and who had known anything about that something might have been happening wrong for me would be like so happy. I laugh at myself. I was so naive. You do not mess with somebody else's denial. You do not mess with somebody else's denial. They need it. They need it. Sometimes it helps. And they don't call it denial. They call it a different perspective. And that's actually probably a better way of looking at it, a different perspective. I don't want to go on for this too long, but I think it's important. And ultimately, in choosing to tell my story the way I did and in choosing to be public in this way, I made the decision. Someone has to stand up for the person I was, and someone has to stand up for the person you were. And you can choose to be that person for yourself. You can choose whether or not you publish. You can choose whether or not you hand it out to people or you publish with a larger house or a smaller one. You can choose. What's important is that you write it down. What's important is that you get it out of your head, out of your heart, and onto the paper where you can look at it differently. So, where will you begin? Where will you begin? What's your first incident? What's the first thing that you remember? Oh, what's the worst thing that you remember? What comforted you in that time? One of the things that helps me a lot is to eat a snack or to sip something. I always have some juice or some hot tea beside me when I'm writing. And there's that cinnamon, that comfort scent. Write an incident. Write one and then another. Put in your happy and pleasant time. It may be that you have one central incident. It may be that you have so many. But here's the thing. A little part of your soul or spirit might be stuck in the past. When you write this, you're going back to yourself and setting yourself completely free. And I think of it, have you heard the story of Pandora's box? You know, Pandora had this box and it was full of all the illnesses of the world and she wasn't supposed to open it. And she opened it up and all the plagues and awfulness and diseases came out and Pandora's going, ah! And then here was the little fairy of hope. At the very, very end, the little fairy of hope, who would have been stuck inside that box with all those horrible things if Pandora had not opened that box and set her free. Does anybody have any questions? At this point, were there any questions or comments that maybe I could consider?
Yes, we had a couple, and I just first want to acknowledge that we were having some audio issues. We could hear you just fine, but there seemed to be a little bit of out of sync between the video and the audio part. So our apologies for that. And hope
so I'm looking like I'm talking, but I'm saying different words. Okay.
Hopefully, also someone mentioned early on that there was, I don't know, some kind of background noise, not on your end, but maybe someone had tried to join by video. I'm not sure, but hopefully that has been resolved. But
I don't see any source of noise.
No, I don't think it's on your end. So we had a comment. Thank you, Kaisa. I believe one of the important reasons for this work is what happens in our bodies as we let the painful memories go by putting them on paper and sharing them. We are strengthened as our bodies mend. The reader who receives the story is given courage to also heal.
That's brilliant. That makes me think of the title of the book for survivors, The Courage to Heal by Laura Davis and Ellen Bass. That's so true. Thank you for that wonderful thought.
Yes. And then we had a comment or a question rather, if you're comfortable with it. They asked if you could read something from Tornado Alley.
Oh, sure. if you want to make an author's happy heart, just ask them to read some of their own work. Yeah, let me pick one of the things. Were there any other questions?
I think those were the only ones so far, but feel free, those of you who are have access to the chat, to type in a question.
Oh, that's good. I've got a part that I'm thinking of. The one thing about Tornado Alley is that Victor Veith said this brilliantly. He said, you can't talk about child abuse without talking about child abuse. And so one of the things that's difficult about this is it gets pretty ugly. It gets pretty ugly, and there's some very, very terrible um, things that happen to me. So when you're reading it, you're going to find that. You're going to find that ugliness, and that's hard. That's really hard. Okay, so I'm picking out which thing. I'll share this from Eli Wiesel before. It's from Night, and of course, it's one of the greatest memoirs of all time. And in this preface, he said, if in my lifetime I was to write only one book, this would be the one. Just as the past lingers in the present, all my writings after Night, including those that deal with biblical, Talmudic, or Hasidic themes, profoundly bear its stamp and cannot be understood if one has not read this very first of my works. Why did I write it? Did I write it so as not to go mad, or to go mad in order to understand the nature of madness, the immense, terrifying madness that had erupted in history and the conscience of mankind? Was it to leave behind a legacy of words or memories to help prevent history from repeating itself? Or was it simply to preserve a record of the ordeal I endured as an adolescent, at an age when one's knowledge of death and evil should be limited to what one discovers in literature? He's writing about the Holocaust and terrors beyond my ability to even comprehend. And yet, the questions are the same. Why are we writing this? What's the point? I love the answer that he came up with in the long run. We're helping to mend the hole in the soul of the world. Okay, I'm going to try to find what I'm doing here and looking at the book is I'm trying to find something that's not too triggering. And there's a section in here called Pig Eyes that I want to share with you. But it'll take me a minute to look it up. Why it didn't occur to me that anyone would want to hear this, I don't know. Okay. Thank you for the pause in time. You know what I'm going to do? Next time we're going to read Pig Eyes. Okay. I'm going to just read a little tiny part. As a youngster, I read about protests, youths taken to the streets, and I got to be on campus during the turbulent years when my father was a student, accompanying him from time to time when my mother had to work. The campus made the national news. Someone lit a Molotov cocktail and set the student union on fire, and I went along. I heard the music. I'd sit in a bar next to my father and listen to Steppenwolf's Magic Carpet Ride, and it felt so magical. I remember crossing the street in Lawrence, Kansas with him. He put his thumb down so I could wrap my hand around it so I wouldn't get hurt by the cars or lost on campus. He bought Joe's donuts, hot, freshly made. I loved the taste of the sweet, warm glaze in my mouth, the donut so piping hot and fresh that the glaze and the dough seemed to melt together in each delicious bite. And those kindnesses created a paradox in my mind. I wanted a father like Pa in the little house books, a kind man who'd listen and give good advice. I wanted a provider who'd protect his family and praise the Lord and set things right. The closest I ever got to having that kind of father had to be during my father's college days when we'd visit the Kansas University campus. But even then, it was a conundrum. The father who dangled me by my arms in the basement and forced me to perform oral over and over and over again was the same father who took me to basketball games and introduced me to the KU Jayhawk at a pep rally. We listened to Max Falkenstein announce the Jayhawk games on the radio. My father took me to the football games, the basketball games. We'd walk down the hill from the campanile with the air so crisp, and my heart leaped up when the band members came pouring from the stands in a sea of red and blue onto the football fields playing that school fight song. And my father would explain the game's happenings in simple terms. Those guys did a bad job, so now they have to go sit down and let the other guys play for a while, he said when the offense left the field. Now those guys, they did a good job, so they get to go rest up while the other guys play. He explained when the defense left, and the basketballs were the greatest. One time we went to a pep rally and the Jayhawk was there, and my father told me the Jayhawk was a real bird that had flown down from Alaska. I didn't know if he was joking. I felt so excited to see the Jayhawk close up and to see the boots and the beautiful blue velvet of the bird's body and the strong red head with its bold yellow beak. Seeing the Jayhawk meant as much to me as seeing Santa Claus. So you can see what happened there, right? I just finished writing the scene. That was hard. I just finished writing about what happened in the basement, and everything in me recoiled. Everything in me leaped back. Everything in me said, I can't do this anymore. What's something happy? What's something he did that was not terrible? Let's think of one not terrible thing. So, of course, I thought of the University of Kansas. Of course, I thought of Rock Chalk Jayhawk KU. And I think that's something we all can do. When you're bogged down by how terrible something was, you can go to that other side. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kaisa. Your writing is absolutely just beautiful. I mean, just beautiful.
I am so disappointed that I can't find pig eyes in my own book because that's like the best part to read.
Well, we had a few comments and a couple questions that came in while you were reading.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank
I'm
you.
going to pass along the comments first, and then you can kind of dive into the questions. One comment, I just love your spirit, Kaisa. You're like medicinal salve we can all smother ourselves in, and I agree.
Oh, thank you so much. That means more to me than I can tell you.
Another comment, your reading is soothing and beautiful, indeed. Interesting, while you're looking for that passage, someone commented and said, I used to ask my mother to not look at me with her pig eyes.
Really? What a coincidental thing. I wonder if that person's from Kansas because it might be how certain things will live in certain places.
Then we have a couple folks who are familiar with some places you mentioned. Someone said, oh, I've been to Joe's Donuts, Rock Chalk, and then Rock Chalk KU.
I don't think it's still there. I don't think it's still there. Joe's Donuts.
We had another
huge.
We had another thanks for your reading and a comment. Yes, I agree with what you said about Kaisa. Her spirit is brave and resilient, offering the crushed in spirit a way out of their torment. She is like medicinal salve we can all smother ourselves in, like another person said, and allow ourselves to heal.
Oh, that is so sweet. Now I'm going to be happy the rest of the day. Thank you. There must be a reason that I can't find that.
No. Mm-hmm. So we did have a couple of questions.
Okay, good.
So, what to do when a sibling has not told her spouse of the abuse? Although I would not tell her story, how do I manage telling mine, opening up that potential?
Wow, did somebody really? This is very important. This is one of the more important things that I will share today, I think. Never, ever, ever, ever. Do you know that whole thing about don't out someone if they have a difference? Don't out your family member when it comes to how they're handling their own situation. And what happened to you may or may not have happened to them. You may or may not have any memory of that yourself, but it is not your place in any way, shape, or form to share their story, not with their children, no, not, not with their spouse, not with their friends, not with their coworkers. What stopped me from sharing my story for so long, except under a pseudonym, was the idea that some of my family members would be painted with the brush of there's abuse in that family. There's abuse in that family. There are people who want to live their lives as if that never happened in their family. And they have the right to live their lives that way. No one has to validate my experience or my reality or my truth just because they might have grown up in the same town with me or whatever. One of the things that's very important to me is that anyone who knows me from my childhood, I just beg for their respect for anyone else they might have known and ask that they never, ever, ever, ever do any harm to any of my family members through what's happened to me. Because it takes a lot of strength and it takes a lot of courage, and I don't want there to be any more collateral damage. I do not want there to be any more collateral damage. And so the answer to your question is don't you dare out your sibling, but tell your own story from your own perspective. And if you have to go through telling that story 100,000 times to make sure that that sibling is out of it, then go through that story 100,000 times to make sure that sibling is out of it. Tell it as if it happened to you, because it is not up to you. You don't know what button you might be pushing. If someone is not open about their childhood experiences, sometimes they can't be. Sometimes it really is too much. Those of us who are sitting here in this group have courage to heal. We have strength to face the past. We have the ability to carry quite a lot on our shoulders. But there's some for whom that would be too much of a burden and they would crack in half. They can't do it. And so we can't force them, push them, or inform the people around them. You don't say, this happened to my sibling, this happened to my sibling, this happened to my cousin, this happened to my mother, this happened to my aunt. You don't tell their story unless they've given you access and permission and they're all right with it. And they're telling their story too. The damage you can do is phenomenal, and you do not want to go there on a one-to-one level ever. You don't go to somebody else's spouse or somebody else's children or somebody else's family. Now there will be times though where that person might ask you, will you come with me? Will you stand with me? Will you share this story with me? I don't want to do it by myself. And that's valid. That's really valid. I hope I didn't seem overly adamant about that, but I think it just matters so much.
Thank you for sharing that, Kaisa. And someone commented on your response there by saying you are spot on. We have to let people heal at the level they are comfortable with healing.
What a nice way to put it. You have to, would you say that again? That was a nice way to put that. You have
Yes.
to heal at the level, say
We
it, how was
we
it?
have to let people heal at the level they are comfortable with healing.
Yes. Do you want to hear a story? A good, last time we had a goodbye poem. This is a goodbye story. Do you want to hear it?
Yes, I will say we do have another question. I have
Okay.
another couple questions I want to save time for, but yes.
Okay. So what we can do the question first, if you want to.
Okay,
Mhm.
so our first one that we have not gotten to yet. Do you know of anyone who has not been able to bear the pain of writing out their experience?
Oh, of course.
Mhm.
Tons. Yeah, sure. Yes.
Mhm.
Absolutely, yes. And sometimes, you can write a song, you can write a poem, you can write something little. Have you ever heard that song, Son? It's a wonderful country song. And the man said he couldn't write the pain of losing his father, who died at 10 years, when he was 10 years old. He couldn't write about it until he had a son himself.
Mhm.
So sometimes there'll be a triggering incident that'll open up our hearts and then tell them it's not going to happen. And there's nothing wrong about that. We each have the right to heal and to deal at our own pace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then another question was, does writing a fictional story rather than a memoir help?
Yeah. Oh, this gives me the chance. I think in a future one, I'm going to interview a friend of mine who has recently written a novel, and it helped a lot. And what you can do with that is you take the energy and the feelings that you need to process, and you use them with your fictionalized characters and situations. And some people do it as very thinly veiled autobiography, like The Bell Jar with Sylvia Plath is a good example, I think. So yeah, it helps a lot. It can help a lot. It's a
Great.
good question.
Thank you.
I
And
wrote
just
I wrote one terrible trash novel. I mean, don't read it, never. But I'll just be real. It's so trashy. But it was right after a breakup. I broke up with some man or other. I can't quite remember his name, but I was so devastated at the time that I just wrote, and it became a novel and helped so much. It was fictionalized. Mhm.
so thank you. And just a couple of comments I wanted to share before you read your passage there.
Mhm.
Um, Regarding not sharing other stories. Thank you for saying this. We cannot help a butterfly free itself from the chrysalis, nor heal someone by forcing them to open up.
Amen. That's so true. That's so true.
And along those lines, a comment: yes, our stories are our own, and we must decide what to do with them.
Mhm. And we have the right to make that decision, but we don't have the right to make somebody else be pushed into the light if they're not ready. That's their process. They might never need to. I mean, I'll be quite frank. Sometimes I flat out envy. I'd really envy those people who don't have to go back and heal. Can you imagine if we didn't have to do this work? Wouldn't that be cool? You know, but I couldn't have survived without it. I literally could not have survived without the writing and the healing and the dealing work that I did and continue to do a lot. Yeah. You ready for a story?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, this is a little bit long. I when I'm needing a little break from the hard stuff, I write chicken soup stories, and this is one. It's from The Advice That Changed My Life, and I wrote it a couple of years ago. If my husband hadn't left, taking all my dreams and my dream house with him, I never would have met the woman whose advice saved my life. Robin showed up one day on the playground near my new place in Boulder, Colorado, and she sat down next to me. We shared stories and watched our daughters play together. And my new neighbor told me, we have to grasp the present. Time goes so fast. Look forward, not backwards. Make new goals. You're free now, she said to me. I'd been crying a lot. Have fun. Fun was not something I knew Let yourself fly. What are your goals? Well, I could beg my husband to come back to me. She groaned. No, you can't control him. You can only control yourself. I tell you what, she says, go running with me. So she encouraged me. I'd never run a step. But soon a Brazilian marathoner showed up on my doorstep to make my training plan. I walked 20 minutes, then 22, then 30, then I added some running. And Robin called or showed up every day to make sure I kept going. She bought a green t shirt that said, Behind every successful woman is herself. And on those days when I felt too sad to lift my head off the pillow, she'd pound on the door till I gave up being grumpy. She'd say, Go running! And we'd run. And then she decided I needed a goal. You're going to run with me in a Halloween 10K race. Robin had run plenty of races, but this would be my first. And at her assistance, I dragged myself to the race course for the Erie. Robin stood in a cheerleader outfit. She had little bat wings waiting for me. Put these on, she said. I knew you wouldn't remember to bring a costume. Costume? I said. Yes, everybody's in costume. It's Halloween and we're going to have fun. Oh, I turned around with reluctance and I let her pin two little bat wings to the back of my shirt. Wings. I started stretching, bending, twisting, breathing. Everything felt tight. Oh, come on, you've got two kids who need you, honey, and you're still alive. You have to keep that body moving, keep that heart a pumping. Let's get going. We started running. Robin stayed with me, even though she could run faster than I could. She said, I got a little cold. I don't want to push too hard. I knew she was only making sure I finished the race. When we ran up the hills, she said, Stretch those legs farther. Breathe more slowly. Massage that heart. On the downhills, she said, Loosen up. Don't hold back. Let yourself fly. I ran my best that day, but at the end of the 10K, about 6 miles, I was exhausted to the core. Robin wanted to run the race in less than an hour. I knew I couldn't do it. She's been a runner more than a decade, and I was a novice. You go on up ahead to make your time, I said. I'll make it. Well, all right, she replied as we got towards the end of the race. Her strong legs surged under her bright red cheerleader skirt as she turned the corner ahead of me. She had such strength, such beauty. She kept smiling. For Robin, life meant pleasure, and I trudged along slowly alone. And then I turned the corner, and Robin leaped out from behind a pickup truck on the last block of the run. She started cheering for me as if she were my own personal pom-pom girl. Go, go, run. She flung her arms up in the air. She kicked her legs up and danced around me. She ran behind me and she was cheering. I'm right behind you, she said. Now, you know you're going to actually be ahead of somebody in this race. I laughed. I crossed the finish line. I made it in 60 minutes, and Robin made it in 61, and she gave me a big hug. It was my blessing to be able to run and laugh with Robin for the next 7 years. When she was diagnosed with stage 4 melanoma, she brought her 8 closest friends together for a long weekend in Breckenridge. We did yoga and cooked together and talked late into the night. One friend had known her since kindergarten. She changed all our lives for the better. I want you all to have each other. I love you so much. A group of us formed a round robin inner circle and took turns being there for her through the cancer journey, giving her husband a little respite. On the way to one of her chemo appointments, she told me, Drive faster. Get in the fast lane. I don't know why they even have that other lane. Robin always lived full out. Everybody thought she'd kicked the cancer to the curb. When I shared Mary Oliver's In Blackwater Woods with her, she told me she wanted to read it. And then she said I needed to read it at her memorial service. I told her she had to live so she could read it at mine. Cancer kept coming. Soon she couldn't run or bicycle or kayak. Her last words to me were, I love you, and soon she couldn't speak at all. I sat next to her and sang Somewhere Over the Rainbow at the last round robin potluck before she passed away. Robin died at home in a hospital bed set up in the living room. We in the round robin didn't mind doing what we could for her because of all she'd done for us. She hadn't been able to smile for a few weeks, but somehow She died looking toward the glass doors outside to the stars, and somehow she had the most beautiful smile on her face. It was the most beautiful, peaceful expression. We all called it her last gift to us. 3 friends dressed her and made her ready for the transition, and I walked with her body to the hearse, and I gave her one last kiss on the cheek. And at her memorial service, I read the words by Mary Oliver that meant so much to her. To live in this world, you must be able to do 3 things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes to let it go, to let it go. Robin told me to keep running. Today I lace up my running shoes and step onto the trail, and in my heart I hear Robin's voice cheering me on. Don't hold back. Let yourself fly. I feel Robin flying far beyond me. I take a deep breath and I fly. And I'm sharing that story with you today because I want you to keep writing. And when it's hard, I want you to keep writing. And I want you to love on yourself as much as you possibly can. And I want you to let yourself fly.
Thank you so much, Kaisa. Just extraordinarily beautiful, and someone echoes that, tender and gentle yet powerful and encouraging writing. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you so much. If anybody wants any support from me, it's healingartofwriting@gmail.com. And I'm glad to be your writing coach.
Thank you so much. I know that we're a little bit over time, but I think it was well worth it. I, for one, could listen to you. I could listen to you read the phone book, but your writing is actually much, much better than the phone book. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today, but also sharing some of your writing as well. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today and for tolerating some of our technical issues. I always say that technology is great when it works. But we got through it, and I appreciate you all being here. We'll leave the chat up for a little while, so if there's any follow-up questions that anyone has, I will be sure to get those over to Kaisa. So thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will convene again. Kaisa will be presenting her next Survivor Circle in this series on November 16th. So look for that information.
And there's a very quick thing to the bold person who asked, well, what about, the fact that my sibling hasn't told anybody? You still have the right to tell your story. We still need your story. Someone else's hesitation doesn't have to become your story. And I'm really proud of you.
Yes.
Courage.
Well said. Thank you so much. Okay, everyone, thank you for joining us, and we will see you again at a future session. Take care.
Thank you.